March 14th, 1977, 11:18 p.m., West 125th Street. The back door of the Alhambra Social Club clicks shut, and Nicky Barnes steps into the alley like he owns the oxygen. A man in a cheap jacket waits under a streetlight that flickers twice, then holds. Detective Thomas Kearns, Manhattan North Narcotics. He closes the distance, palm open, and the slap lands flat, loud, humiliating. Two of Barnes's men hear it. A patrolman sees it and keeps walking. Kearns whispers, "You're a file." Barnes smiles because files have signatures. Tonight, the badge isn't protection. It's leverage, and someone else is holding it. Barnes doesn't swing back. He doesn't even rub his cheek. He looks past Kearns, toward the precinct building at the end of the block, as if the bricks are listening. Calvin Cal. Roberts takes one step forward, heat in his eyes, but Barnes lifts two fingers and Cal freezes. Junior, the driver, keeps the Cadillac idling, dark blue Fleetwood, plate from Queens, engine purring like a patient animal. Kearns raises his voice for the street. "Go home." Barnes nods once, climbs into the back seat, and says the first order of the night. "Park behind the 28th. Right now, slow." 2 years earlier, Kearns had been the kind of cop Barnes could budget for. Friday nights, 9:30, the diner on Amsterdam, booth near the kitchen, a folded newspaper on the table. An envelope slid beneath the menu. In return, a raid missed a staircase, a seized package lost its chain of custody, a witness forgot the date. Not favors, services. Barnes never called it friendship, and Kearns never called it bribery. It was maintenance, like paying for heat in winter. But maintenance only works when the landlord wants rent. Tonight's slap says the building changed owners and nobody renewed Barnes. Junior turns into the narrow lane behind the 28th precinct, tires crunching grit. Barnes tells him to kill the engine. The alley smells of wet concrete and old exhaust. Unmarked sedans sit nose to nose, black paint swallowing light. Kalskans rooftops. Barnes watches the back door, metal, plain, used by men who don't want neighbors seeing them. At 11:34, it opens. Lieutenant Patrick O'Shea steps out. Heavy shoulders, slow walk, cigarette lit without hurry. He looks down the alley like he's measuring distance, not to run, but to control. Barnes thinks, Kearns didn't slap me for pride. Permission. Only. At 11:41, the back door opens again, and Kearns comes out fast, collar up, hands buried, pretending cold is the reason. He stops halfway, turns, and speaks into darkness. "Barnes." The name is a hook thrown a shadow. Barnes steps out of the Cadillac alone. No rush, no entourage, just a man who refuses to look hunted. Kearns tries for contempt. "You following me?" Barnes answers softly, "You drew the map." Kearns's eyes flick to the door, a fraction of a second. Barnes catches it and says, "O'Shea." Kearns swallows. That swallow tells Barnes he needs. The slap was theater. Kearns keeps his voice low, like the building has ears. "There's heat," he says. "Task force. Downtown people. They want to win." Barnes doesn't react, because reaction is a gift. "You volunteered me," Barnes says. Kearns spits. "They already had your name." He says O'Shea wants a headline, wants cameras, wants a sweep that looks clean. Barnes hears the real confession in the gaps. Kearns is scared of losing his place, scared of being exposed as the hinge between street and station. Barnes asks, "What do you want?" Kearns answers, "I want to live." Barnes nods. Living makes men sloppy. Barnes tells Junior to wait. Engine off. Lights dead. The precinct breathes behind brick. At 11:56, a thin figure shuffles into the alley from St. Nicholas Avenue. Head down, shoulders hunched, moving with the desperate speed of someone afraid of both cops and dealers. Barnes recognizes him before Cal does. Eddie Vargas, 22, runner and addict, invisible until somebody needs a scapegoat. Eddie freezes at the Cadillac silhouette, then blurts, "Detective Kearns told me to come." Barnes steps closer. "To do what?" Eddie swallows. "To sign a statement." He said it's just paper. Barnes feels the trap. It isn't his. Barnes doesn't comfort Eddie. Comfort costs time. He asks one question. Who else knows you're here? Eddie glances toward the back door. That glance is a confession. Barnes tells Eddie, stand where they can see you, but don't sign anything. Not for Kearns. Not for anyone. Eddie stares, confused. Barnes adds, if they push, you say you want a lawyer. If they threaten, you say you're scared. Eddie laughs once broken. I'm always scared. Barnes replies, good. Fear keeps you honest. Cal hates it, using a junkie as a piece on the board, but Barnes isn't using Eddie. He's using Kearns's desperation. At 12:07 a.m., Lieutenant O'Shea steps into the alley like he owns air. No badge displayed, no gun shown, just a coat and heavier confidence. He clocks Barnes, then Eddie, and his eyes tighten at the surprise. Barnes, he says. Barnes nods, Lieutenant. O'Shea points with his chin. What's that doing here? Barnes answers, ask your detective. O'Shea's yav flexes. Downtown wants results, he says. Barnes replies, results get messy when people ask how long you were quiet. O'Shea steps closer, voice low. Get in your car. Don't become a reason. Barnes understands. O'Shea doesn't fear him. He fears noise. O'Shea turns toward the door and calls, quiet but final, Kearns. The back door opens and Kearns appears too fast, eyes already hard. He sees Eddie and his face twitches. What are you doing here? Kearns snaps. Eddie starts, you told me. Kearns cuts him off. Shut up. O'Shea asks, is this your witness? Kearns says he's nobody. Barnes replies, he's your nobody. Eddie blurts it. Kearns wanted a statement, a story. Kearns grabs Eddie's arm, then freezes because O'Shea is watching. Barnes murmurs, pull him inside and you make him my witness. O'Shea says, let go. Kearns lets go. O'Shea steps closer to Barnes, treating Kearns like furniture. Get in your car, he says. Leave, and tonight becomes a misunderstanding. Barnes holds his gaze and understands. O'Shea doesn't care about honor. He cares about containment. Barnes nods once and walks back to the Cadillac without rushing. Junior starts the engine. Cal watches Kearns with a look that promises retaliation, but Barnes shakes his head. The Fleetwood rolls out of the alley. In the rear window, Barnes sees O'Shea pivot toward Kearns, voice low, shoulders hard. Barnes tells Junior, we don't touch him. We let him fall. On his own, back on Linux. Junior asks the question everyone wants answered. You letting him walk after that? Barnes watches the reflection of streetlights slide across the glass. He didn't hit me, Barnes says. He signed me. Cal scoffs. Barnes continues. If I hit him, I become his story. If I stay quiet, he becomes mine. Cal wants names, wants orders, wants a target. Barnes gives him a job instead. Find out who changed Tommy's appetite, he says. Who's been feeding him courage? Cal nuts, frustrata. Barnes adds, and don't touch him. Not even with gossip. We're to watch him bleed. March 16th, 6:05 p.m., Cal parks a Dodge Dart on West 123rd, across from a bar Kearns likes because the jukebox is loud and nobody asks questions. Kearns arrives in an unmarked Nova and sits without entering, eyes fixed on the side door. At 6:17, Lieutenant O'Shea shows up in clothes and slips inside. 10 minutes later, Kearns follows, shoulders tight. Cal writes it down because patterns matter more than rumors. At 6:48, Kearns comes out alone and uses a payphone, head bowed like a man reporting. Cal drives to Barnes and says, your slap came with a supervisor. Tonight, March 18th, 2:20 p.m., Barnes meets his lawyer Hines in a small office above a travel agency on 116th. Hines brings a warning. There's a new interagency group, he says. They're trading names like baseball cards, and cops are eating each other to look clean. Barnes asks who's steering it. Hines slides a photocopied memo across the desk, the kind that should never leave a file. Barnes reads one phrase, Public Integrity Liaison. Barnes looks up. So Kearns isn't hunting me, he says. He's proving he isn't mine. Hines nods. He's trying to survive a purge. Barnes leaves, stomach tight. March 22nd, Barnes meets his crew in a barber shop after closing, shutters down, chairs turned backward. He doesn't mention the slap. He mentions leaks. Someone's feeding the cops, he says, eyes moving from face to face. He places 3 envelopes on the counter, each with a different address in his handwriting. Fake drops, he says. Each of you gets one. No explanations. 2 nights later, 9:40 p.m., Cal spots Kearns's unmarked sedan idling near one of those addresses like it's expecting a delivery. Barnes hears the report and doesn't rage. He smiles once, private. Now the leak isn't rumor. The leak is Frankie Lott, a bookkeeper who believes numbers make him invisible. Barnes invites him to breakfast, 8:10 a.m., a diner on Malcolm X Boulevard with a front window and civilians everywhere. Frankie arrives sweating. Barnes orders eggs and coffee and talks about nothing for 5 minutes. Then he slides Frankie's envelope across the table, unopened. You didn't hand yours to Kearns, Barnes says. Frankie's fork freezes. Barnes continues, gentle, so you handed it to someone who did. Frankie starts to deny. Barnes cuts it off. Don't lie. I'm not asking why. I'm asking what Kearns promised. Frankie whispers, my record. Barnes doesn't spare Frankie out of kindness. He spares him because he's a fuse. He gives Frankie one instruction. When Kearns asks again, say yes, but demand cash up front. Barnes isn't buying Kearns. He's forcing him to choose greed where he can't pretend it's policing. March 27th, 10:55 p.m., Frankie meets Kearns outside a laundromat on 118th. Kearns asks, you got it. Frankie says, money first. Kearns hesitates, then slides a thick envelope from his jacket, careless. Cal watches from a rooftop with binoculars. No photos, no tape, just a witness fact. Kearns is paying for lies. That matters. For a week, the pressure seems to ease. Kearns stays away from Barnes's corners. No patrol cars crawl the block. Cal thinks O'Shea pulled him back in a line. Barnes doesn't believe in peace. April 2nd, 7:33 p.m., a bartender hands Barnes a message. Kearns wants to sit down at the Prime Rib on 139th booth, 9 o'clock. Barnes knows what it is, a lifeline dressed as authority. He agrees. Then at 8:47, the location changes. New place, new time. Bring cash, the message adds. Kearns isn't negotiating. He's steering Barnes to witnesses. Barnes tells Cal, he's not collecting money. He's collecting me. Tonight. Barnes doesn't go to the second location. He understands the point is the move itself. Make him look evasive. Make him look guilty. Instead, he calls Hines. Kearns is staging. Hines answers. Then we aim a light at his stage. April 3rd, 3:15 p.m., Hines meets a public integrity investigator at a cafe near Foley Square. Hines doesn't say Barnes's name. He says, a detective is paying addicts for statements. The investigator's eyes sharpen because the city tolerates corruption until it becomes unpredictable. Unpredictable cops create unpredictable headlines. That's when they get cleaned. Barnes doesn't trust the city, but trusts self-preservation. Kearns panics by tightening the leash and calling it control. April 5th, 10:22 p.m., he steps up to Junior's Cadillac at a red light on 7th Avenue, flashing his badge like a warning to invisible cameras. He taps the window. Junior looks back, and Barnes lowers the glass 2 inches. Kearns smiles with teeth. You missed our date, he says. Barnes answers, you're paying for stories now. The smile slips. Be careful, Kearns says. You're not the only one who can be touched. Barnes holds his gaze. You already touched me, Barnes says. Now you'll learn what it costs. Soon. April 8th, 11:58 p.m., a bartender on 125th calls Cal from payphone. Kearns is here, she whispers. He keeps saying, tonight I fix it. Cal brings the line to Barnes, and Barnes doesn't smile. Fixing means force. Barnes pulls on a dark coat and tells Junior to bring the Fleetwood. He tells Cal to find Eddie. Cal asks why. Barnes answers, Because Kearns thinks Eddie is disposable, and disposable men make great witnesses. At 1:12 a.m., the Cadillac sits behind the 28th in shadow, engine off. Barnes watches the back door, calm as a man waiting for a verdict. Eddie arrives at 1:15, breathless, cheeks hollow, eyes wide. Cal steers him into shadow and holds him in place with a firm hand. He said, "I sign," Eddie whispers. He said, "I can vanish." Barnes studies him, not with pity, with calculation. "You don't sign," Barnes says. "You talk. You tell the truth once, then you keep repeating it." Eddie shakes. "They'll hurt me." Barnes answers, "They don't want to hurt you. They want to use you." Using lasts. Eddie swallows hard and nods like a man swallowing poison. The back door clicks. Barnes goes still again. Kearns steps out at 1:19, pale, jaw clenched, eyes sharp with sleeplessness. He spots Barnes and forces confidence onto his face. "You think you can wait me out," he says. Barnes answers, "I think you can't stop moving." Kearns points at Eddie. He signs, "Or you give me a name." Barnes shakes his head. "You're drowning," he says. "You want to climb on me." Kearns snarls, "Then I'll help myself." Behind him, the door clicks, and Barnes sees O'Shea's shadow before O'Shea appears. Kearns doesn't notice the shadow. That's the problem with panic. You stop watching the people above you. O'Shea steps out with company. Two plainclothes men flank him, and a third follows in a clean suit, no badge shown, but the posture of someone who never has to prove authority. The suit doesn't greet Barnes. He studies Kearns like a stain on paperwork. "This him?" he asks. O'Shea says, "Yes." Kearns stiffens, trying to smile. The suit finally looks at Barnes. "You're leaving?" he says. Barnes asks why. The suit answers, "Because you're not the purpose tonight." Eddie's breathing turns loud. Barnes understands. The city didn't come for him. It came to erase risk, and Kearns was expendable. Kearns opens his mouth, but O'Shea kills it with a look. The suit's voice is quiet, surgical. "Detective Kearns," he says, "we're going to have a conversation." Kearns swallows. "About what?" The suit answers, "Your witnesses, your evidence, your calls." Eddie. Eddie trembles, teeth clicking. Kearns looks at Barnes with hate, at O'Shea with betrayal, then back at the suit with fear. Barnes stays silent, because silence is power when other men are talking themselves into corners. O'Shea leans close to Barnes and murmurs, "Go, before you become a reason." Barnes turns and leaves into darkness without looking back once. In the car, Eddie rides hunched, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the dash. Junior drives without speaking. Cal bachas miros. Barnes listens to the city hum and thinks about the slab, how it landed under a light that flickered twice, then held. Eddie whispers, "Am I dead now?" Barnes answers, "Not tonight." Eddie asks, "What happens to Kearns?" Barnes says, "He becomes a lesson." Barnes gives Eddie one rule. If anyone asks, tell the same truth every time. No extra details. Eddie nods, grateful and terrified. Barnes knows gratitude fades, but fear holds. The Fleetwood glides on a riverside drive home. By April 14th, the first ripple reaches the papers as small print. A Manhattan North detective under review. A witness statement inconsistent. Evidence handling questioned. The language is careful, meant to protect the institution while it cleans itself. Hines calls Barnes at 6:30 p.m. and says, "It started." Barnes asks, "How loud?" Hines answers, "Loud enough that O'Shea is angry." Barnes smiles without joy. Angry supervisors make mistakes. Cal asks if Barnes wants to push, to pour gasoline. Barnes shakes his head. "No, let them cook." Barnes knows the city punishes who it can replace, not who it needs today. O'Shea doesn't call Barnes. He calls around him. April 18th, 4:40 p.m., a city inspector shows up at a storefront Barnes quietly owns on 132nd and announces a surprise code check. Next day, a health officer appears at a restaurant that pays Barnes rent. Then a patrol car sits outside Junior's mother's building in Queens for an hour. None of it is illegal. That's what makes it sharp. Cal wants fire. Barnes refuses. He wants me loud. Barnes says. He wants me to make his problem my problem. Barnes watches the Hudson move. Steady, indifferent. We won. Kearns is toxic. Kearns doesn't vanish overnight. He lingers, filing reports, laughing too loud, trying to prove he's fine. Then, in early May, he's reassigned to a desk facing a blank wall. His gun is taken for review. His cases are redistributed. Men who once called him Tommy now call him detective like the title is offense. Barnes hears it through Hines. Internal affairs want an accounting, and public integrity wants names. Kearns offers names. He always does. But names aren't enough because the city doesn't want a confession. It wants a scapegoat that can't argue. That's what Kearns becomes. Slap backfired. Barnes knows O'Shea will pretend the damage was weather. That's why Barnes keeps distance. He changes cars, rotates drivers, shifts meeting places, not in panic, in discipline. Cal asks if Barnes ever wishes he'd hit Kearns back, just once, to make the street feel right. Barnes answers, I did hit him. I hit his usefulness. Cal hates that because it isn't satisfying. Satisfaction is for movies. Survival is quieter. Barnes thinks of patrolmen who walked past the slap, choosing blindness to protect the system. Barnes understands the system always protects itself first. Sometimes you can use that. Sometimes it uses you. People retell it like pride, like a slap demands a punch. Barnes knows pride gets men buried. What mattered wasn't a hand on his cheek. It was the audience Kearns needed when he did it. Kearns thought a badge made him untouchable. It made him accountable to higher hands. O'Shea thought power meant ordering men into cars. It meant choosing which mess stays private. Eddie thought being small made him safe. It made him useful. March 14th, 1977, 11:18 p.m., Harlem. One flat slap rewrote a contract nobody admitted existed, and it proved the city punishes what embarrasses it first. In June, Barnes spots Kearns outside criminal court on Center Street. Not as an enemy, as a warning. Kearns looks smaller, suit wrinkled, eyes searching for allies that don't exist. He doesn't approach. He doesn't swagger. He looks like a man waiting to be told what to say. Barnes feels no triumph. Triumph is noisy. He feels confirmation. Cal asks if Barnes wants to finish it. Barnes answers, it's finished. He's a desk and a rumor. Barnes watches Kearns light a cigarette with shaking hands and realizes the colder truth. The system rarely destroys you with bullets. It destroys you. Eddie doesn't become a hero. He becomes a man who learns to say one sentence and repeat it until his voice stops shaking. Hines keeps him in a cheap apartment and a quiet job moving boxes. Nothing glamorous, just distance from the corners that remember his weakness. Eddie hates Barnes for using him and thanks Barnes for not letting him vanish, sometimes in the same breath. Barnes accepts both. He didn't save Eddie out of mercy. He saved him because Kearns treated him like paper. Paper cuts. Eddie's truth doesn't topple the precinct, but it sharpens blade that cuts loose. Barnes replayed the alley like a tape. The streetlight flicker, the patrolman choosing to keep walking, Kearns raising his voice for an audience he couldn't see. Barnes understood what most men learn too late. Power isn't what you do. It's what others believe you can do without consequences. Kearns wanted consequences for Barnes and ink, not blood. O'Shea wanted consequences for Kearns in silence, not ink. Barnes wanted to survive the change of ownership without signing a lease he couldn't afford. That's why he didn't hit back. He refused to give Kearns proof of rage, and that refusal cost Kearns. Harlem kept moving, because it always does. New faces, new cars, new rules whispered at night. Barnes carried the memory of Kearns's palm, not as humiliation, as calibration. When people called cops untouchable, Barnes heard a joke. Untouchable meant temporarily useful. It meant someone higher hadn't decided you were expensive yet. Barnes didn't hate Kearns. Hate is attachment. Barnes hated unpredictability. So he watched patterns, followed schedules, measured silences. He learned the city's real violence isn't always a gunshot. Sometimes it's a badge changing hands. Sometimes it's a supervisor deciding a man is risk. After that, nobody wants your touch. Barnes tells the moment to no one, because telling it would turn it into mythology, and mythology makes men sloppy. But on certain nights when the city is quiet, he remembers the crack of palm on cheek, meant not to injure, meant to label. He remembers Kern's whispering, "You're a file," and the patrolman's shoes continuing past the alley. The patrolman didn't hate Barnes or love Kearns. He obeyed the invisible order of the moment. That invisible order is what Barnes learned to fear and to use. He learned the strongest threat isn't "I'll kill you." It's "I'll make you evidence." March 14th, 1977, 11:18 p.m., Harlem. Barnes keeps the timestamp because it marks the moment a cop tried to shrink him in front of witnesses. The slap was meant to make Kearns look clean. Instead, it proved the badge answers upward first, and anyone can be sacrificed when the city needs a story. Barnes didn't turn the other cheek out of grace. He turned it to see who was watching. That pivot changed everything. After that, Barnes moved by math, not anger. Kearns performed, got exposed, and became replaceable. Barnes learned the cold rule: make power choke on noise tonight.